So this question is an assumption-based question. So our job here is to determine whether the assumption, which here is labeled proposed assumption, can be proven from the statement above. So just like for the inference type questions, it's usually a good idea to first read the proposed assumption before the statement. So that proposed assumption says, companies that are especially vulnerable to high levels of cyber attacks do not invest in data security. And the question is this assumption made in the statement, or is the assumption not made? So let's take a look at the statement. The statement reads, those companies that are especially vulnerable to high levels of cyber attacks should invest in more data security, either internally or by bringing in external experts. So what do you notice? Well, the first part of the assumption is the same as the first part of the statement. The assumption begins, companies that are especially vulnerable to high levels of cyber attacks. Now in the statement, it reads and begins, those companies that are especially vulnerable to high levels of cyber attacks. So we essentially begin in the same place in both the statement and the proposed assumptions. But then it continues. In the assumption, do not invest in data security. And then in the statement, it says, should invest in more data security. So these are essentially opposites. The statement is saying, if you are more vulnerable to cyber attacks, then you should invest in more data security. Whereas the assumption says, if that is the case, then they do not invest in more data security. We can also note that there is an additional part of the statement that is actually irrelevant for our purposes. It reads either internally or by bringing in external experts. And again, this has no bearing on our proposed assumption. So the part that we are interested in to answer this question is again, should invest versus do not invest. So these again are opposites. The proposed assumption is therefore not made, and the correct answer is assumption not made.